All right, we'll say good morning. Let's begin. Today's daf is Chaf Gimel. A really great daf. Really great daf. We're going to start Chaf Beis and Beis 22b by the Gemara. So remember again, Mishnah introduced us ultimately again to cases where I go and I take a Shevuos not to eat, and I eat and I drink. The Mishnah Paskin that I'm only going to be chayav once. So I'm Rabbi Chia bar Avin Amar Shmuel. Shevuos shelo ochal b'shasa chayav. The halacha is that if a person goes ahead, Shevuos shelo ochal b'shasa chayav. So Rabbi Chia bar Avin said in Shmuel that if a person takes a Shevuos, I'm not going to eat, and what happens? They drink, so they're chayav. In other words, we'll say, I take a Shevuos, I'm not going to eat, I don't eat, but I drink, I'm chayav for violating my Shevuos. Says the Gemara, so why is this? So again, one possibility is I can learn this out from a pasuk, or I can learn this out ultimately again from a svara. So the Gemara says, Ibais ema svara. If you want to say that it's a svara, because sometimes it's just the way that people talk. When a person says to his friend, let's go eat something, and they end up in what? They end up eating and drinking. So we see ultimately that what? That shtia is bichlal achila. Drinking is subsumed under the umbrella of eating. But so the other possibilities were not from a pasuk. What's the pasuk? That ultimately, again, drinking is subsumed under the umbrella of eating. Reish Lakish, from where do we know that drinking is included with eating? Both the pasuk says by Meiser Sheni that you will bring your Meiser Sheni and you will eat it in Yerushalayim. And when it says v'achalti, you shall eat, what does it include? Ma'asar degancha v'siroshcha, the Meiser of your grain and of your grapes. Top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, v'sirosh chamri. Both say, what's grapes? What's grapes? Grapes is wine. And yet, what do you see? Uksiv v'achalta. And it says you will eat it. So what do you see from here? You see from here, shtia bichlal achila. That ultimately drinking is included under the umbrella of eating. V'dilma ayid anigron. Well, maybe the case over here is that you're drinking the wine. Or we'll say anigron is a beet dish. A beet dish, B-E-E-T. A beet dish. So therefore, again, I'm drinking wine as part of this beet dish, in which case, again, it's still a case of achila. Amar Rabbi Shmuel anigron ma'id salki. Anigron is a dish that's made with beets. Ach sigron ma'id kulu silki. Ach sigron, let's remember this from our brachos days. Ach sigron is water, or is a dish made from cooked vegetables. So we'll say, so maybe the case of tirosh, in the case of Meiser Sheni, is where a person is consuming wine, but wine is being consumed as part of solid food. Davka being consumed ultimately as a drink. Here's where it comes from. We'll say here's the source for saying that shtia bechal achila. V'nasata kesef bechal asher tava nafshecha babakar ubatzon bayanu b'sheichar. The pasuk says again. I will say by Meiser Sheni, if you redeem Meiser Sheni for money, you take the money, you spend it in Yerushalayim. You can use the money for whatever you want. Bakar, tzon, wine, sheichar, yayin, chamru. We'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that the pasuk, wine obviously is a drink. Wine is a drink. And I will say, what does the pasuk say? The pasuk is v'achal tosham. So the pasuk uses lashon v'achila even by drinking wine. Ukse v'achalta. So maybe it's the same case. Maybe the case over here is where you're drinking the wine through or mixed in with a solid food. That's why it calls it achila. To which the Gemara says, however, ksheichar ksiv midi demashka, but that's not true because it says what? It says sheichar. Now, what says sheichar means it's an item that intoxicates. When wine is mixed in with food, it doesn't intoxicate. So it must refer to what? It must refer to wine which is being consumed on its own. One second, the Gemara says, is that not true? There are foods that intoxicate. Listen to this. The dilma devela ki'ilis. I will say maybe it's talking about these ki'ilis figs, right? These ki'ilis figs had an intoxicating quality. Disanya achol devela ki'ilis. If a kohen ate this cake of pressed figs, this type of ki'ilis figs, vishasa devash, or you drank honey, vichalav and milk, v'nichnas lemikdash. You drank honey and milk and you went into the Beis HaMikdash. Va'avarin did avoda chayiv. We'll say ultimately again a person is chayiv. Why? Because these items all have an intoxicating or an inebriating effect. So you see from here that what? That you could have, so first of all, it's just an interesting halach in general, that a kohen, we know that a kohen is not permitted to do the avodah shtuya yayin. He's not permitted to go ahead and do the avodah under the influence. What's interesting to see is that it's not only limited to alcohol consumption, but apparently intoxicating foods would also preclude him and prohibit him from doing the avodah, which is pretty amazing. So which the point the Gemara is making over here is that you see that there are intoxicating foods. Ela gamar shechar min nazir. Rather, we make a gzir shava between meiser sheni and nazir. It says shechar by meiser sheni. It says shechar by nazir. Mar lahalan yayin. Just like by nazir, shechar refers to wine. Afkan yayin. So too by meiser sheni it refers to wine as well. And therefore I will say what? And therefore because shechar refers to wine by meiser sheni, so the Torah tells me that I could redeem the money of meiser sheni shleim and use it to purchase wine. And what lashon does the Torah use? Torah uses the lashon of va'achalta. Oh, what do we see from here? We see from here that shtia bichlal achila, that drinking is called eating. I'm saying, you'll say to yourself, wonderful. Who cares? So why does it matter for us? Because if I take a shvuah and I say shvuah shelo ochal, I swear I'm not going to eat anything today, and I drink, what's the halacha? I'm in violation of my shvuah. I'm chayiv. Why? Because shtia bichlal achila. Because ultimately drinking is subsumed under the umbrella of eating. Amar Rava says, we also learn this. If a person took a shvuah that I'm not going to eat, and he ate and he drank, I will say ultimately he's only chayiv once. So it says, let's analyze this. So if you say that shtia is included under achila, it's ultimately, that's why the Tana has to go out of his way to tell me that I'm only chayiv once. But I will say, if you say that shtia is not part of achila, shvuah shelo ochal, then when I take a shvuah not to eat, va'achal va'asa malacha, mi'itztrich lashmo'inon de'eno chayiv ela achos. So I will say, listen to this. So the Gemara says, if you hold that shtia is not bichlal achila, right, shtia and achila, two different things. Then if I take a shvuah shelo ochal and what? I go ahead and I eat and I drink, then of course again I'm going to be chayiv twice. In other words, I will say, do I need the Gemara to teach that? Meaning, let's say a person goes ahead and takes a shvuah on Shabbos. I take a shvuah, I'm not going to eat. And I eat and I do malacha. So does the Gemara need to tell me that I'm chayiv twice? Of course I'm chayiv twice. They're two independent things. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. Therefore I will say, what do we see from here? We see that ultimately shtia bichlal achila, that drinking is subsumed under the umbrella ultimately of consumption. Fine. So we have successfully proven that first point, and therefore again that backs up the statement of Shmuel, which is what the Gemara started with, that if a person takes a shvuah shelo ochal and instead he goes ahead and he drinks, he is still going to be chayiv for the violation of the shul. We'll say first wide line chaf gimel amud aleph ema seifa, but here's the problem. Let's look at the end of the Mishnah. Shvuah shelo ochal v'shelo eshta. Person takes a shvuah. I take a shvuah that I'm not going to eat and I'm not going to drink. Va'achal v'shasa chayiv shtayim. What did the seifa say? And I eat and I drink, I'm chayiv twice. But 1 second. Kevan da'amar shelo ochal itzarlei b'shtiya. Ki amar shelo eshta amay chayiv. So we'll say, here's the problem. We just established that shtiya is bichlal achila, that drinking is part of eating. So therefore, again, so now in the second case of the Mishnah, I then take a shvuah. I say shvuah shelo ochal v'shelo eshta. I say a shvuah that I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink. So we'll say, what did the Mishnah say? I'm chayiv twice. But 1 second, why am I chayiv twice? At the end of the day, if you say that shtiya is bichlal achila, then when I go ahead and I say shvuah shelo ochal, what does that include? Achila and shtiya. And therefore what? And therefore when I go ahead, ki amar shelo eshte, when I then take that second shvuah and I again say shvuah that I'm not going to drink, am I chayiv? Why should I be chayiv at all? Ilu amar shelo eshte, shelo eshte shrei zimni, mi chayiv tarti. Both say, if I say, I swear I'm not going to drink, and I drink, how many times am I chayiv? Once. Why? Because Rabbi say that second shvuah is meaningless. Because the second shvuah doesn't come to prohibit any more than what the first shvuah did, and therefore again there will be no chiyuv under those circumstances. So therefore Rabbi say, what the Gemara is asking is the following. If you hold that shtia is bichlal achila, then when I say Shevuos shelo ochal, Shevuos shelo eshte, as soon as I say shelo ochal, that automatically includes achila and shtia. Therefore, again, when I say shelo eshte, that's a meaningless statement. If it's a meaning, then why does the Mishnah paskin that when I eat and when I drink, I'm chayiv twice? To which the Gemara says, Amar le hasam da amar shelo eshte v'hada amar shelo ochal. This is very interesting. What's the case of the Mishnah? The case of the Mishnah is where I first made the shvuah not to drink, and then only afterwards did I take the shvuah not to eat. Why? So we'll say, so that there, what does that create? That creates two independent shvuos. Why? The shtia bichlal achila isa, achila bichlal ashtia lesa. Because I will say, listen to this. This relationship only goes in one direction. Shtia, drinking, is considered a part of eating. Eating, however, is not considered a part of drinking. Therefore, again, I will say, therefore, and again, this is all intuitive. Therefore, again, when the person says Shevuos shelo ochal, if I say I take a shvuah not to eat, so by definition that includes what? That includes what? Eating and drinking, achila and shtia. And therefore, I will say, if I go ahead and I eat and I drink, I'm only going to be chayiv once. Not only that, but if I say Shevuos shelo ochal and then Shevuos shelo eshte, that second shvuah is meaningless because the prohibition on shtia is already included in the first shvuah. However, if I go ahead and I say Shevuos shelo eshte, a shvuah that I'm not going to drink, that only covers what? That only covers shtia. That does not cover achila. That does not cover achila. Therefore, I will say, listen to this. If I take a Shevuos shelo ochal, and then afterwards take a Shevuos shelo eshte, if I take a Shevuos shelo eshte, I'm not going to drink, and then afterwards take a Shevuos shelo ochal, and then I eat and I drink, how many times am I chayiv? Twice. Because I will say both of those Shevuos work. And that, the Gemara is suggesting, that's the case in the Mishnah. The case in the Mishnah is where I first took the Shevuos shelo eshte, then the Shevuos shelo ochal. Both Shevuos devolve upon me, and therefore when I eat and I drink, I'm going to be chayiv twice. Incredible. Incredible. Aval, Amr Shevuos shelo ochal v'shelo eshte, but I will say, if I say Shevuos shelo ochal, and if I say, I take a shvuah, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink, v'achal v'shasa, and I did eat and I drink, what's the halacha? Mai? Eno chayiv ela achas. So you will say, in that case, I'm only going to be chayiv once, where I take a Shevuos shelo ochal, Shevuos shelo eshte. Why? Because ultimately, again, achila is, shtia is bichlal achila. Ihaki, okay, so I said, fine, I'm following you. But if that's the case, adatani reisha Shevuos shelo ochal, va'achal v'shasa eno chayiv ela achas. So in the beginning of the Mishnah said, I take a shvuah not to eat, and I end up eating and drinking. So the Mishnah said, I'm only chayiv once. Listen, why don't you instead say the following? Shevuos shelo ochal v'shelo eshte eno chayiv ela achas. Why don't instead you make a better case? What's the better case? Let the better case be, I take a shvuah that I'm not going to eat and I'm not going to drink. So you both say, in the Mishnah's first case, the case was Shevuos shelo ochal. I take a shvuah that I'm not going to eat, and I end up eating and drinking. What is the Mishnah paskin? I'm only chayiv what? Only chayiv once. So Gemara says, let me give you a better case. A better case. Why doesn't the Mishnah say, let the guy say, Shevuos shelo ochal, Shevuos shelo ochal v'eshta. Right? I take a shvuah that I'm not going to eat, that I'm not going to drink. So here, he's explicitly articulating both achila and shtia. And then he goes and he eats and he drinks. What's the halacha? He's still only chayiv once. Why, Rabbi Osai? Because shtia is bichlal achila. Why don't you say that case? Listni Shevuos shelo ochal v'shelo eshte. Let the Mishnah state a case of a shvuah I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink, and let the Mishnah say in that case eno chayiv ela achos v'chol shekain shelo ochal lichudei. And all the more so, I will say, in a case where I just said Shevuos shelo ochal and then I eat and I drink, then of course it can only be chayiv. So what the Gemara is asking over here is, why doesn't the Mishnah give me the most chiddishdik case? Meaning, give me the most novel case. The most novel case is not Shevuos shelo ochal, and then a person eats and drinks. That's only chayiv once. Right? The most chiddishdik case is where a person says, Shevuos shelo ochal v'shelo eshte, where a person explicitly articulates a shvuah that I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink. Then they go and they eat and they drink, and yet the Mishnah still paskins that what? You're only chayiv once. Why? Because essentially the second shvuah of shelo eshta is meaningless, because shtia is bichlal achila. If you tell me that case, then of course I know in a case where a person just says Shevuos shelo ochal, and then they eat and they drink, that of course I'm only going to be chayiv once. To which the Gemara says, Ella li'olam kediktani. Rather, as I says the Gemara, we have to go back to the way it is originally stated in the Mishnah. And the case of the Mishnah is where he says, first he says, achila before shtia. V'shayni hacha. I will say, so what's the case over here? See, here's the problem. What the Gemara now is suggesting is, we're going to look at the Seifa, we're going to understand the Seifa as stated. What's the case in the Seifa as stated? He's saying, Shevuos shelo ochal, Shevuos shelo eshta. I take a shvuah that I'm not going to eat, that I'm not going to drink. And what did the Mishnah paskin? The Mishnah said that I'm chayiv twice. I'm chayiv twice. What about the fact that shtia is bichlal achila? Good morning, Mr. Schoenfeld. Okay, for the best part. So listen to this. What does that mean? So Gemara says, "Shiny hacha." Listen to this. Kevan da amar shelo ochal, v'hadar amar shelo eshte, gali daite dahach achila da amar achila greidasihi. We'll say, see here the Gemara answers, which seems to be the pashut answer. When a person goes out of their way to articulate something, so clearly they're coming along to make more specific statements. So halach l'maisa, when a person comes along and says, Shevuos shelo ochal, v'shelo eshte, then what they're clearly saying is what? The achila that I articulated before does what? Does not include shtia. Meaning, see, I will say, as you see over here, that when it comes to Shevuos, so much of Shevuos ultimately, again, is focused on what a person says and how a person says it. You see, we'll say there's a klal gadol in life. What's the klal gadol in life? Close your mouth. Words to live by. Close your mouth. Right? In other words, that the less you say, sometimes the sharper your words are. So a person says, Shevuos shelo ochal, great, I understand. That includes achila and shtia. Once a person goes ahead and says, Shevuos shelo ochal, Shevuos shelo eshte, obviously that extra phrase is coming to do something. If it was coming to do something, then what? Then you shouldn't say it. Then don't say it. Then I already got that one. I'm sorry. Right? Then don't say it. Then don't say it. The fact that he goes out of his way to articulate Shevuos shelo ochal v'shelo eshte means that the achila that he's mentioning, he means achila gridasa. Achila by itself, not achila with shtia. And therefore he's coming to create two distinct prohibitions upon himself, one for achila and one for shtia. Amar Rav Ashi Masnisa Nami Dega. Our Mishnah seems to support this assertion. Shevuos shelo ochal v'achal ochlin she'in ru'uyin la'achila. What's the word of the Mishnah say? If a person, I take a shvuah, I swear I'm not going to eat, and then I end up eating things that are not fit for consumption, v'shasa mashkin she'in ru'uyin l'shtia, or I drink things that are not fit for consumption. Pater. I will say, what's the halacha? I'm pater. Ha ru'uyin chayiv. But it seems to be that if it was fit for consumption, I would be chayiv. V'amai. Ha shevuos shelo ochal kamar. So we'll say ultimately again, why would I be chayiv ultimately again twice? For this, I said, Shevuos shelo ochal. Dilma damer tarti Shevuos shelo ochal. Shevuos shelo eshte. And we'll say it must be a case of where what? Where ultimately again, I explicitly articulated two things. Ultimately again, Shevuos shelo ochal and Shevuos shelo eshte. So we'll say, so the idea over here, so what comes out from this sugya? What comes out from this seems to be that the bottom line from the sugya is that shtia is bechlal achila, that drinking is considered to be a part of consumption. Drinking is a chiluk of shtia. Therefore, I will say, for our purposes, if a person takes a Shevuos shelo ochal, I take a shvuah that I'm not going to eat, and I end up drinking, I will be chayiv for violating that shvuah. However, again, if a person were to say, and therefore again, I will say, however, the exception to this could be when a person explicitly articulates and says, Shevuos shelo ochal, Shevuos shelo eshte. That if a person explicitly articulates a separate shvuah for achila and a separate shvuah for shtia, then obviously they're coming to say that achila is achila by itself and shtia is by itself. So we'll say this seems to be the way the Rambam paskins. So the Rambam says, this is in Parak Daled Hilchos Shevuos. So listen to this. Rambam says, Parak Halacha Vav, Shevuos shelo ochal v'shelo eshte. Person takes a shvuah that I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink. V'shasa, v'achal v'shasa, and ultimately again, and I ate and I drank. Chayiv shtayim. So what's it? The Rambam Paskins, I'm chayiv twice. Shashtia bechlal achila. Because under normal circumstances, shtia is considered part of achila. However, ho'elu perish amar shelo eshte galadaito shel klal shtia bechlal achila. The nimsa kenish ba'al zeh b'fnei atzmo, ba'al zeh b'fnei atzmo leficha chayiv shtayim. So let's say, the Rambam sums it up in 4 lines. Number 1, achila is bechlal shtia. That's how he passes halacha l'maisa. But, if you explicitly articulate a shvuah, and you say, Shevuos shelo ochal, Shevuos shelo eshte, you're going out of your way to explicitly articulate 2 distinct shvuahs, then what? then you mean to break them out, and therefore if you eat and you drink, you will be chayiv twice. Beautiful. We'll say weiter. So also remember again, the next case in the Mishnah was as follows, where a person goes ahead and he takes a Shevuos shelo ochal. I swear that I'm not going to eat, and what happens? He goes Shevuos shelo ochal, paschitin, pasorin, paskusmin, va'achal. So we'll say, so what happens if a person goes ahead and, first case is a person says, I'm not going to eat, and he eats wheat bread, barley bread, spelt bread, he's only chayiv once. If he says, shvua, that I won't eat paschitin, pasor, and paskusmin, and he eats each of those breads, then what? He's chayiv for each of them. So it says the Gemara, v'dilma, right? Ultimately, again, maybe the reason why he made a separate shul, so we're trying to figure out, what would be a reason why a person would say Shevuos shelo ochal paschitin paskusmin pasar? In other words, why would you articulate that? Why? What's the need for that? So it says Dilma lemiftar nafshe mi'achrenaisa. Well, maybe the guy is coming along, Rabbosai, and not really to create separate liabilities, ultimately, again, for each type of bread, but rather to go ahead and highlight the fact that he's not prohibiting himself to other food items. To which the Gemara says, if that's the case, he could have just said, chitin sa'orin v'kusmin. Then ultimately, Rabbosai could have just said, chitin sa'orin and kusmin. Ultimately, instead of going ahead and saying what? Shevuos shelo ochal, Lashon over here was, Shevuos shelo ochal, pas chitin, pas sa'orin, pas kusmin. The fact that he's articulating pas by each of us seems to indicate to us that he's creating Shevuos specific items. V'dilma, pas chitin lechol, sorin v'kusmin lakos. So we'll say maybe he's coming along to prohibit pas chitin, but he's also coming along to what? To go ahead and say that he should be permitted to go ahead and chew on kernels of barley. The hamile lememar, pas chitin v'shal sa'orin v'shal kusmin. I could have just said ultimately what? Pas chitin and also of sa'orin and also of kusmin. V'dilma amud beis. V'dilma ayedei taroves. Maybe Rabbosai, look at Rashi, Tar Rashi, Chafakim Lamud Beis. V'dilma ayedei taroves. I amar hachi hava mashmele shlo yochal pashi yesh ba kol amin halalu. Maybe the reason he didn't say paschitin v'shal sorin v'shal kusmin is Rabbosai. What does that sound like? What does it sound like it's prohibiting? Maybe it's only prohibiting what? It's prohibiting a bread that's made, a loaf that's made out of all these different grains. Well, if that's the case, Ema v'chein shal sa'orim v'chein shal kusmin. He could have just said, and so too of grain, so too of barley, and so too of spelt. Pas lamali. I will say at the end of the day, what the Gemara is bothered by is why does he have to say pas chitin, pas sa'orin, pas kusmin? So in other words, you begin to see a trend here when it comes to Shevuos and later on by Nedarim. We analyze each and every word. In general, we say, Chachamim hizaru b'divreichem. Person should always be vigilant with his words and always choose his words exceptionally carefully. But I will say, when it comes ultimately again to Shevuos, so again we mamish analyze every single word. Why is he saying pas chitin, pas sa'orin, pas kusmin? I will say that word pas, essentially the Gemara understands to go ahead and generate a separate prohibition upon each of these items, thereby creating separate shvua liability for each different type of bread. And I will say this is indeed how the Rambam paskins as well. The Rambam says, this is the same parak Tal Halacha Zayin. V'chino omer Shevuos shelo ochal pas chitin, pas orin, pas kusmin, v'achlon, chai v'akal achas v'achas. If a person says Shvua, that I won't eat barley bread, I won't eat spelt bread, I won't eat wheat bread, and I eat them, I eat all of them, I'm chayiv for each and every one. Why? Shelo omer pas, ela lechalek, because I will say the inclusion of that word pas by beginning of every statement ultimately indicates that I'm creating separate shvua liability by each of these items. Incredible. Let's go back there. So we'll say if I take a shvua that I'm not going to drink, and I drink a lot of drink, right? I go ahead and I drink a lot of different things. I'm only chayiv once. Okay, so let's analyze this. So says the Gemara, Bishlam Hasam Da'amar, Da'amrit Miyashele Pas Lechiyuva. So we'll say, so let's go back for just a moment. In the Mishnah's case over here, The Mishnah's case is Shevuos shelo eshte. Case number one is I take a Shevuos that I'm not going to drink, and what happens? V'shasa mashkin harbe. I drink a lot of different items. What's the halacha? Eino chayiv el achos. I'm only chayiv once. Second case Rabbi say is Shevuos shelo eshte yayin shemen udvash. I take a Shevuos that I'm not going to drink wine, oil, honey, v'shasa, and I drank them. Chayiv al kol achas v'achas. I'm chayiv for each and every one. Okay, those are the two cases. So says the Gemara, Pishlama Hasam. I understand in the previous case by the loaves of bread. The Amrit miasrele pas lechiyuva. See, Rabbi said there was an extra word there. That extra word pas before mentioning each of the different types of bread. That extra word, what did that extra word do? Rabbi say, what did it do? What did it do? It split up each of the items into separate Shevuah liability. Elahacha. Rabbi say in this case where a person says Shevuos shelo eshte yayin shemen dvash. So I don't understand. Maybe he's not coming to create separate Shevuah liability. He's just coming to articulate certain things. What else could he have said? Maybe he's just coming along to say it's only these items that I'm prohibiting myself to, but I'm not prohibiting other forms of drink. We'll say, what's the case? The case is where these drinks are sitting before him on the table. The yayin, shemen, and dvash are right there on the table. Shahayala lomar, Shevuos shelo eshte elu. We'll say, what's his goal? The goal over here is this yayin, shemen, and dvash is sitting right in front of him. And his goal is he wants to prohibit these items upon himself. So what should he have said? What should he have said? Shevuos shelo eshte elu. We'll say, that's what he should have said. The fact that he says what? Shevuos shelo eshte yayin shemen udvash, we understand to mean what? A more globalized shvuah, an independent shvuah liability for each of these items. The dilma eluhu delo shasina, achrini shasina. Also, maybe the reason they didn't use this lashon is because had he said that, they would have inferred that it's only these items, this particular yayin shemen udvash that is aser, but other yayin shemen udvash will be mutter. Ela da'amar shvuah delo shasina kegon elu. Rather, says the Gemara, he could have said, right, I take a Shevuah that I will not drink like these. And Rabbi said that would have prohibited these items. The fact that he chooses to make a more global Shevuah of Shevuah shelo ochal yayin shemen udvash indicates to us what? That he's coming to create a more general Shevuah with separate Shevuah liability for each item. Ella, dilma, kigon elu delo shasina betzir mehachi utfei mehachi shasina. But if you were to say that, Rabbi said, maybe that would infer that's what? He won't drink like these items. But again, I will say maybe like these items means what? The exact measure. But more than these amounts, less than these amounts, ultimately again, he would be able to drink. Rather, I will say what he could have said is a shvuah that I won't drink from these types, from this min. The dilma min eluhu delo shasina. Ihu gufayhu shasina. I will say, but if that were the case, then maybe ultimately I would infer from that it's only min elu delo shasina. It's only these. It's only this type of drink that he can't drink. But these items sitting in front of him on the table he could consume. Ema shelo eshte elu. So uminayhu. Rather, what he could have said about is, I won't drink these as well as their respective meaning. Rabbi say, what's the case over here? Rabbi say, the case of the Mishnah is as follows. Where this man is getting peer pressure to drink. Getting peer pressure literally means his friends are chaperoning him to drink. Ultimately, again, where his friends are telling him, come, drink with us wine, oil, honey. The haya lo lomar, and I both say, what's happening? This guy, the guy in our Mishnah, does not want to drink with his friends. So what does he do? He takes a shvuah, ultimately, again, in order to prevent himself from drinking with his friends. What would have been the proper formulation for that? The habile lomar, shvuah shelo eshte imcha. He could have just said, I take a shvuah that I'm not going to drink with you. And I will say that would accomplish the task. But yet, what does he say? Yayin v'shemen udvash lamali. So I will say, if this is a din in avoiding peer pressure, so then there's a very simple way to avoid peer pressure. What's the simple way? Shvuah, that I'm not going to drink with you. I hereby swear I'm not going to drink with you. Done. Then I can't drink with you. I will say, but that's not what he says in the Mishnah. What does he say in the Mishnah? Shvuah shelo eshte yayin shemen udvash. Why does he make that articulate? Why does he articulate this? Yayin v'shemen udvash lamali. Ultimately, again, what Rabbi say to go ahead and to go ahead and prohibit himself upon all these different items. And I will say, this is the same idea that Rambam brings down. He says, actually, we're going to leave this case until we finish the next case. So also, the idea that the Gemara is saying over here is as follows. If this is a din of peer pressure, then the easiest way to avoid that is to say, Shvua shelo eshtimcha. I take a sure that I'm not going to drink with you. The fact that he says, Shvua shelo eshte yain and shemen and dvash, Shavuos is unnecessary to alleviate the peer pressure. When he goes in and he says that, we'll say, how do we interpret that? We interpret that as a bona fide shvua, and the fact that what? That he articulates each independent item tells me what? That it's creating separate shvua liability for each of these items, and therefore, if he drinks yayin, shemen, and dvash, he'll be chayiv for each of them. Incredible. Tanan Hassam. Let's listen to this case. Now we're transitioning for just a moment to what's called Shevuos HaPikadon, Rashi points out. Well, Shevuos HaPikadon means that if I say that I deposited something with you, and you claim you don't have it, I could force you to take a Shevuos. Listen to this case. Tanan Hasan, also we learn there. I go over to Reuven and I say, Reuven, I gave you my wheat, my barley, and my spelt to hold for me, right? To hold for me. Or oats told for me. And what happens? And I will say, Reuven says, I swear I have none of your property. I have nothing of yours. And I will say, turns out that's what? That Reuven was lying. So what's the halacha? Eino chayiv ela achos. He's only chayiv one. So we'll say, so let's say the case over here is, I deposited chita, sa'oreng, and kusmin with Reuven. I say, Reuven, give me back my wheat, my barley, and my spelt. And what happens? Reuven says, I have nothing of yours. And then it turns out that he's lying. He's only chayiv once. I must say, now what's the novelty in this? The novelty, of course, is he was kofar. He ultimately denied 3 different things, right? Wheat, barley, and spelt. And yet he's only going to be chayiv once. However, if Reuven says, Shvuah she'en lecha biyadi, chitin u'sorn v'kusmin, but I will say, if Reuven were to say, I swear, I don't have your chita, I don't have your se'ora, I don't have your kusmin, then what? E chayiv al kol achas v'achos. Then Rabbi say he will be chayiv for each and every one. Why, Rabbi say? Why? Because in that case, what's happened? He specifically articulated a denial of each and every item independently. So if he makes a general denial, I have nothing of yours. Okay, and it turns out that he's lying, he's chayiv once. If he makes an item-specific denial, I don't have your chitin, I don't have your seor, I don't have your kusmin, then he's going to be chayiv for each and every one. But Rabbi Yochanan says, afilu pruta mikula mitztarefes. I will say, even a pruta from each of them ultimately combines. Take a look at Rashi. What does that mean? Pruta mikula mitztarefes. Well, it's actually by the top of Rashi, only about 5 lines into the short lines. Pruta mikula mitztarefes. Lechayvo al shvua. Below al kol achas va'achas el lechayvo asham echad. So this is actually quite interesting. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says that even if there's only a little less than a pruta from each of them, when you combine all of them, it turns out to be a pruta's worth of a claim. They're ultimately combined. So we'll say, in other words, what the Gemara is saying over here is, even though each independent item that he denied was less than a shava pruta, if combined they form a shava pruta, then ultimately again he will be chayiv for the denial of that pikadon. Pligi barav achav Ravina. So Rav Acha and Ravina argue on this. Chad amar aprati mechayev aklali lo mechayev. V'chad amar aklali nami mechayev. So we'll say, listen to this. So what's their machlokes? So we'll say, when a person goes ahead and says, so let's play out this case. I go to Reuven, I say, Reuven, give me back my chitin, soren, and kusmin. And Reuven says, I don't have your chitin, soren, and kusmin. So what is Reuven chayiv? So listen to this. So there's a machlokes of Acha and Ravina. One says, Chadamar aprati mechayev aklali mechayev. So we'll say, let's analyze what the possible number of violations are. At most, how many violations are we speaking about? 4. And I'll tell you why. Right? No, good. It was a trick question. Right? 4. And I'll tell you why. The 3, denial for wheat, denial for chitin, denial for sorin, denial for kusmin. But there's also possible of a 4th, which is what I will say, a general denial that I owe you nothing. So I will say, so the shaila is in this case where Reuven goes in, he says, I don't have your chitin, I don't have your son, I don't have your kusmin. What is he chayiv for? Chad Amar, aprati mechayiv, aklali lo mechayiv. So one says, he's only chayiv for the specific denials of wheat, of chitin, son, and kusmin. But aklali, the quote-unquote general denial, which is supposed to be the denial that I have nothing of yours, ultimately, again, he's not going to be chayiv. The Chadim, or the other opinion says, aklali nam mechayiv. The other opinion of Abosai says that no, he's going to be chayiv 3 for the specific denials and 1 for the general denial. Now the idea over here, the interesting chiddush over here is, the general denial is not even really explicitly articulated. It's just understood. In other words, if when Reuven says, I don't owe you chitin, I don't owe you son, I don't owe you kusmin, what he's essentially saying is, I owe you nothing. I owe you nothing. So if you're chayiv 3, if you're chayiv 4, it's subject to machlokes. Hachamai. If I say, what about here? Now look at Rashi. Hachamai mi pligi ba nami Rav Acha b'Ravina b'maslisan l'chayva dalid chada ashala ochal utlasa aperuta de prata. So we'll say, so again, the shaila is over here. What about in our case? What about in our case? We'll say we're ultimately again back to Shevuos ochlin, right? Back to Shevuos bitui, where a person goes down and they say Shevuos shelo ochal pas chitin, pas saorin, pas kusmin, and they go out and they eat all 3. Will you be chayiv 3 things, or will you be chayiv 4 things? As you violated each of the Shevuos, but are you also chayiv a 4th? Amar Rava Hachi Hashta, so the Gemara says, Hachi Hashta, Hasam, Mechayev Aklala, Mechayev Aprata. So we'll say, it's different. The Gemara says, you're mixing and matching Shavuos. This case of here, I will say, by me and Reuven, where Reuven's denying that he has something in mind, that's called Shavuos HaPikadon. That's called the Shavuot regarding an item that was deposited with someone for safekeeping. I gave Reuven my chitin, saorin, and kusmin. I demand it back. He says, I don't have your chitin, I don't have your son, I don't have your kusmin. I will say, so it's in that case, Hasam, Mechayev Aklala, Mechayev Aprata. It's only the case of Shavuos HaPikadon, where a person, where Reuven could be chayiv for the klal, the general denial, I have nothing of yours, and aprata, and the individual or specific denial of chitin, saran, and kusmin. Daha imishtaba v'hada mishtaba mechayiv tarti. Because we'll say in that case, if Reuven swears, I swear I don't have your chitin, I swear I don't have your saorin, I swear I don't have your kusmin, then what Rabbi say? He's chayiv each those Shavuos. Hacha isa kadaitra isa bichlal aprati amay mechayiv. Mushba va'ometu. We'll say here, by the Shavuos of our Mishnah, if you say that there's a general Shavuah, then by definition, all of these specific items are included in the general Shavuah. In which case, again, then what Rabbi say? Then where you need to go ahead and specifically articulate pas chitin, pas kusmin, pas saorin, what you're doing is you're swearing upon something that is already us, which we call mushva va'omed, in which case one would not be chayav. So we'll say, this is actually so distinction over here that the Gemara is making. This incredibly profound distinction, that's what? That l'mais, again, when it comes to Shevuos HaPikadon, when it comes to a Shevuah, ultimately, again, regarding an item that was deposited for safekeeping, so we'll say, in that case, ultimately, we could say that a person can be chayav for individual Shevuos and a global, more general Shevuah as well. But by what we call Shevuos bitui, which is the Shevuah ultimately again of our Mishnah, we'll say once you can say that there's a general Shevuah that covers everything, then by definition what? There is no room for individual Shavuos to devolve upon that original global Shavuah. Therefore, the Gemara is suggesting this machlokes about what we call the klali and prati by Shavuos is dafka machlokes by Shavuos HaPikadon, but does not apply by the Shavuos bitui of our Mishnah. Good. Says the Gemara, Shavuos shelo ochal. We'll say, well, let's begin this sugya. What you just said seems to be inherently contradictory. How so? Haguf akasha. Amrit Shavuos shelo ochal. Va'achal ochlin she'in ru'inyan la'achila. So we'll say, we just said before that what? If a person if a person takes a shvuah not to eat something, pater. So we'll say, what did we say? First case the Mishnah said that if I take a shvuah not to eat, and then what? What happens? I end up eating or drinking things that are not fit for consumption. What's ta'alacha? What's ta'alacha? Pater. Yet then I say, you said later on, Shavuot in the Mishnah, that if I take a Shavuot not to eat, and then what Rabbi say? I go ahead and I eat nevelas, treifa, shkatzim, v'ramasim, all these non-kosher items, then I'm chayiv. So says the Gemara, Ma'ishna reisha de pater, U'ma'ishna seifa de chayiv. Now the assumption is that nevelas, treifos, shkatzim, v'ramasim are what? also einam ru'uyim la'achila, are not fit, quote unquote, for consumption. So if that's the case, I will say, why am I chayiv? You said before, in the first case of the Mishnah, or the earlier part of the Mishnah, that I take a shvuah not to eat something, and I eat something that's not fit for consumption, I'm pater. Then you went on and you said that if I take a shvuah not to eat, and I eat shkatzim, ramasim, nevelos, treifos, then I'm chayiv. So what's going on over here? Mashna Risha, Mashna Seifa. To which the Gemara says, Mashna Risha de pater, u'mashna Seifa de chayiv. To which the Gemara says, look at Rashi, Mashna Risha, kasaka daitcha, de nevelo trefa, nami ochlin shein ruyin halokasha, Reisha bistam, beseifa b'mefarish. I will say, what's the case? Look at Rashi. Halo kasha kolomar im kusha acheres ein kan zu yesh lateres v'chein b'chol duchta diika halo kasha sfar. So Gemara will say, what's the difference? The difference over here is the reisha is bistam, right? I will say, as we're going to see in a little bit, the reisha is a case where a person makes an unqualified statement, Shevuos shelo ochal, and he goes and he eats foods that are not ultimately fit for consumption. Then he's pater. The Sefer Rabosai is where he's mefarish. To which the Gemara says, mefarish nami gufei tikshe, amai musha mehar sinahu. We'll say, even if a person is mefarish, even if he articulates, still, I don't understand why I'd be chayiv here. If I take a shvuah not to eat, and I end up eating the velos treif shkatzim v'raimasim, I will say, ultimately, again, I should be pater. Why? Let me say differently. Why should I be chayiv for the shvuah? At the end of the day, I'm chayiv. I will say, why am I chayiv? Why am I chayiv? Because I've eaten something that is already prohibited. But I shouldn't be chayiv for the shvuah, because at the end of the day, these items are already usher without the shvuah. To which the Gemara says, I will say, this is the same answer we've given a number of times. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan Da'amri bekolal dvarim hamutarim im dvarim ha'asurim. We will say, what's the case over here? The case is where ultimately, again, I am including permitted items together with prohibited items. We'll say, we've seen this concept before. If I take a shvuah not to eat, and I eat nevelas, trefa, shkatzim, v'ramasim, I will be pater. Why, Rabbi say? Because ultimately, again, those items are already usher. But if I take a shvuah not to eat permitted items, I could include in that shvuah what? Prohibited items also. So it's called a shvuah koleles. It's what's called a shvuah, which includes other things. So meaning, once I'm taking a shvuah that devolves upon permitted things, that shvuah isser could also devolve upon prohibited things. Reish Lakish says, "Iya tamotzi el ibe mefarish chatzi sheva libe derabanan ibe stam alibe derabi kiva damar adam oser atzlo b'choshu." We'll say the other possibility is that lamaisa, the case of where nevelos shkatzim v'namasim could become chayi because Shabbos is when we have an Isra Nevela Medoraisa, we spoke about this 2 days ago, that Isra Nevela devolves upon what? A Kizayas. A Kizayas. Rabbi say less than a Kizayas will not be Asr Medoraisa. So Rabbi say, when could a Shavuot devolve upon even that which is already prohibited? If the Shavuot comes along to what Rabbi say? To prohibit that which is not prohibited biblically. What is not prohibited biblically? Rabbi say what? Either Chatzi Shir less than the Shir, or in this case also a Kol Shahu. Any amount. We'll say that'll be a case ultimately again where the shvuah could even devolve upon that which is prohibited. So we'll stop over here for today. We're going to pick up with this discussion because remember again, we're still in the middle ultimately of trying to figure out when, under what circumstances, can a shvuah devolve upon that which is already prohibited. So again, we now see there is the possibility of Chatzi Shir. There's the I lost the crowd. Okay. We'll say have a good day. We'll continue with this tomorrow. Yeah, I know. I get it.
Can you say I'm not, but I will drink?
Yes, absolutely. You.